How can we have better dates and fewer regrets? Because we all want healthy relationships, right? We want to avoid heartbreak. We want to go on great dates and just have fewer relational regrets. But in a culture that is so heavily focused on, being in a relationship, the idea of being single or even knowing how to have a good relationship can feel complicated and can often lead us to feeling unsure of our value and our identity. But what if there's a way to avoid some of this heartbreak and have more confidence in who we are? What's up, everybody? Nate here. Welcome back to the living room, or TLR for short. We are so pumped that you are here. Yes, you, right there. And you driving, too. You shouldn't be looking at the screen, but we're glad that you're here. If you have no idea what you stumbled upon or you forgot since last time, TLR is a podcast and a community brought to you by Sojourn, where we talk about life, faith, and whatever else comes up. We created this community for anyone who wants to join in on these conversations. Speaking of joining in on conversations, Sarah, how can the people do that?
Yeah, if you want to join in on the conversations that we're having, which we would love for you to do, Instagram is the best way. And on our page, we'd love for you to share your thoughts and beliefs, but more importantly, to listen to what other people are sharing. Plus, Instagram is a great way to meet new people and to get connected with everything that we have going on around here at Sojourn. But don't worry, we linked all of it in the description down below, so you don't have to remember any of it, which is great. But wherever you're at in your faith journey, we hope that you enjoy today's episode and that it inspires you to continue this conversation and to take your next step in your faith journey.
Bam! Sarah, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so today we are starting a little mini-series talking about relationships and how to have better decision, or how to make better relationship decisions and have fewer relationship regrets. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about how to have confidence, whether you're single or dating or just in this place of trying to figure it all out, which I think for many of us, we probably can relate to that for sure. I'm
married. I think it's still going to apply to me.
Yeah, that too.
I think it's everybody, Sarah.
It is. It is everyone. That's what I said, whether you're single, dating, or married. Sure, I should have said if you're married too.
Yeah.
That works. You are married. I'm not. But all that to say is it is no surprise that relationships are everywhere, all around us. It's in the music we listen to, the movies and the TV shows that we watch. It's in the books that we read, things that we see on TikTok or Instagram. Just, it is everywhere. And I think especially right around Valentine's Day, it can be really in your face of, hey, are you in a relationship? Are you not in a relationship? Are you single? Are you dating? Where are you at? And so that is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. But before we jump in, I wanted to share just kind of a funny story of when I was in elementary school. Some of you may have heard this story before, but my mom took me and my 4 younger siblings to the library to watch some magic show that was happening. And I was sitting there in the front row with my siblings, and the magician asks for some volunteers to help with a magic trick. And because I love to volunteer for everything, I, of course, raised my hand. And so the magician calls on me and this other boy that was around my age. And so he has us stand up in front of the room. He has us introduce ourselves, and then he looks at me and he looks at the boy, and he's like, he sees that we're around the same age, and he goes, so, Sarah, are you single? And I go, no. And he goes, oh, so you have a boyfriend? I said, no, I have 4 siblings, because yes, very embarrassing now looking back on it. Everyone in the audience laughed. Well, at least all the parents. To me, it literally went straight over my head.
At you too.
I know, they were. It
not with you.
No, they were definitely laughing at me, because to me in my head, I really did not even know what that question meant or why it would even matter. But I think the older that I got, the more that question just starts being asked more. I mean, how many of us have been in a conversation or a room where someone's like, are you in a relationship? Are you single? And I think that so often that this can put pressure on us. And for me, I really wanted to find a way that whether I was single or in a relationship, that I could have confidence in who I was and not have to feel like there was something wrong with me if I wasn't in a relationship, or that there was something wrong with being single, or that there was something wrong with being in a relationship. And so I think that this dynamic of what we feel like, where we feel like we get our value from and where our identity lies, there definitely is that kind of dynamic in play when we talk about relationships. Nate, you want to kind of just unpack a little bit of that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, well, so first there's this, that if you place all your weight or your identity as a person and like, am I in a relationship or not? Well, from the start, this is going to lead to some highs and lows, because if you're in a relationship, you're going to be feeling good. Right? But then if you're not in a relationship, you're then feeling bad. And so you're just going to go through life like that. But it's even more nuanced and honestly worse than that, because, so there's just the, are you in a relationship or not? But then it becomes, okay, well, now I'm in a relationship, but is the relationship going well? However you define well, right? And, here's the thing. I've been married for 11 years. Go me. But it's so cute. But maybe not after I say this. Here's the thing, okay? And I feel like I have authority to say this because, again, 11 years speaking here. You're not happy every day, okay? Like, I mean, even within your relationship, it's going to go up and down, right? And so that's the thing, is that if you're defining yourself by your relationship status, okay, then if that day things aren't good, okay, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner is mad at you, okay, well, then that's just your day. And I mean, and obviously, if your boyfriend's mad at you, your girlfriend's mad at you, like, and stuff, like, obviously that's going to impact how you're feeling. But we're talking about even deeper than that, that you're like, I'm not a good person because my relationship isn't just great today. And there's the thing, a lot of days they're just like, I mean, they're just fine. But if who you are as a person is being defined by your relationship, what you're ultimately going to see is just a big roller coaster of when things are good, they're good, but when they're bad, they are awful. All right. And you're just up and down, up and down. And honestly, this is a side trail that we won't go down. That's true for anything you put your identity in. If it's your grades, if it's your work, is what people say about you, what you have, all of it, anything. And dating is such a big one that we put our identity in. It just leads to a lot of up and down, up and down.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, like, for so many people, it's so easy to do that, because it can be easy to think like, oh, I'm single, I'm not in a relationship, therefore, like, something's wrong with me, or I need to do something differently, or like, I'm in a relationship, so I'm great. And then as soon as that relationship ends, it's exactly what you're saying. Like, we all of a sudden feel less than, or like we have less value. And that is really exhausting and really tiring. And it can make us really like question, am I actually valued? Where does my identity actually lie?
Oh, it's extremely exhausting because it just, I mean, and you have maybe experienced this, or you've seen people experience this. I mean, this is just what unlocked it. That like when we've all maybe seen the person that, like, when they break up or they get dumped or whatever, they're just like, it's just like, everything sucks, I suck, and they're just in a really dark place. And a lot of people can end up staying there until what changes, they're in a new relationship. And it can just be exhausting. And this is why I'm excited for you to dive into what you're talking about, Sarah, because this is where we think Jesus is good news and offers a better way forward. This is where I think Jesus has something to offer that sometimes we maybe forget about, or honestly, we just don't talk about or teach. But Jesus is good news, and Jesus has good news that can help you get out of the cycle of just things are good when I'm in a relationship, they're bad when I'm not in a relationship, and just that cycle that happens over and over again.
And I think that what we're going to talk about today is kind of going to help us answer the question of how do we have healthy relationships, and how do we have confidence whether we're in a relationship or whether we're single? How do we have confidence that we still have value regardless of our relationship's status, whether we're single, dating, or married, that we still have value? Got to include the married folks on here. But
they're right.
What we're going to talk about is something that Paul, who writes a majority of our New Testament in the Bible, what he writes. But before we jump into specifically what he wrote, I just want to share a little bit of Paul's backstory real quick, because I think it makes what he's going to tell us and what he writes even more important. So Paul had spent pretty much the first half of his life hating Christianity and wanting it to end. And he would go into different towns and villages and arrest Christians and even put some of them to death because he just did not want Christianity spreading. And so he was honestly pretty violent and had lived this crazy life of just trying to end Christianity. And then he had an encounter with Jesus. And from that point forward, he started being one of the biggest advocates and leaders for the church at that time. And he started writing all of these letters to different churches, encouraging them to continue practicing the way that Jesus taught them to live. And I just think looking at Paul's life and seeing the complete polar opposite lives that he lived, I think that that's what makes what we're going to read so important, because Paul, if any of you are ever feeling bad about how you're living your life, you're in good company with Paul, because he probably had a lot of regret for the things that he had done. But yet what he says next is really, really powerful, and I think is where we can find so much confidence and hope. And so we're going to look at something that Paul writes to a church in Rome. I think it's going to be up on the screen. Paul's writing this to a church in Rome, and he starts by saying this. Well, before this passage, before we read, he is writing this whole thing about what God's love looks like for us. And he wraps up by saying this. He says, "For I am convinced." And I just want to stop here before we continue reading, because I think it's so pivotal that he says the word convinced, because when you're convinced by something, you are certain that it has value or good impact in your life. You're not convinced by something that doesn't matter to you or that isn't going to impact your life in a good way. But Paul is convinced by something, and he's seen it play out in his own life. And so he continues. He says that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Paul lists both kind of a lot of these contrasts of death or life or angels or demons. And I think the point in this that I think is so helpful for us, and where this all ties into relationships, is that what Paul is saying is that nothing can separate us from God's love for us. And honestly, I think that if Paul was talking to us today, he would probably add nothing, not even being single or in a relationship or dating someone or being married, can separate us from God's love. And where I think that this is such good news and why we can have so much confidence in this is that this is where we can place our identity. And for me, as someone that has been single, this gives me so much confidence that whether I'm single or in a relationship, that I can be secure in who God says that I am, that regardless of my relationship status, I can have confidence that I'm loved by God, and that nothing can change that. I mean, Paul lists all of these distinct differences between life and death and the future, the present, and all of these things. And I think he's using these sharp contrasts to kind of show hey, absolutely nothing can change the way that God views you and it can't change God's love for you. And I think when we pause and think about this in terms of our relationship status and why we're talking about this and why any of this actually matters, is that when we are thinking about relationships and wanting to have healthy relationships and make fewer relational regrets, this actually makes our relationships healthier, because we're not looking to another person to give us our identity. I mean, that is a pretty big role to put on somebody, of this one single person. If I start dating them, I'm going to get my identity from what they say about me. That is exhausting. We wouldn't want that pressure put on us, and it is a lot to put that pressure on someone else. And I think being able to remain confident that this is exactly what God says about us, that we are loved and that nothing can change that, kind of eases that tension of having to put that pressure on somebody else. And secondly, it also just gives us confidence that whether we're single or trying to date or kind of in the midst of relationships, it gives us confidence that we are loved and valued, not because of our relationship status, but because of who God says that we are. And this just gives me so much hope, because there's just this constant peace in this, that no matter where you're at in your life or your faith journey, or whether you're single or in a relationship, or whether you've been dating someone for a really long time, or you've just broken up, or you're trying to get back into a relationship that just ended, that you are deeply loved by God and that nothing can change that. And I think that when we become confident in who God says that we are, it actually helps our relationships to be healthier and helps us to make fewer regrets and make better decisions in our relationships. But all of this is, again, really easy to sit here and say, and it's a lot harder to actually put it into practice. But Nate, do you have any advice or tips for what this looks like?
I mean, I would just start with that. I mean, I absolutely love this verse and this passage. It is, Sarah knows this, I read this pretty regularly. In fact, this is the thing, it's the first kind of like Bible verse that I have my kids learn and memorize it. Both when my kids are working on it, my daughter can say pretty much this verse and like 5 or 6 verses before it. And the reason why, and I'm not saying that to say I'm a great dad, but the reason I say that is that, thank you, but it's really to drive this point home, is that all the things that you're saying, that this is so pivotal and so important for helping to anchor your identity in something that isn't changing, right? I talked about how, if you're anchoring your identity to anything other than Jesus, including dating, it's going to be a roller coaster, but this is constant. And that's the thing, right? You want that to be true. You want your identity. You want who you are as a person to be stable. That no matter what circumstances happen around you, no matter if you're dating, not dating, you have a great partner or a bad partner, they had a good day or a bad day, all the variables, the thing that you want to be constant and to have confidence in is who you are as an individual and what primarily defines you. And that's the thing, is that this is what we see Jesus offering here, and this is what we see Jesus offer to us, is that you can have confidence, you can have that. And so what does it look like practically? I mean, one, maybe the biggest piece is to identify what is it about dating that makes me want to put my identity in that. Like, is it the need to be accepted? Okay, well, here's the good news. God accepts you. Okay, all right. Is it the need to have somebody listen to me? God will listen anytime. Is it the need to feel loved? Guess what? God loves you. I mean, like, what is the things that is causing you to put your identity into this? And then working on shifting your identity and remembering and reminding yourself. I think, honestly, a lot of it is a remembering game, a reminding game. This is part of why for my kids, want to just drill this verse into their heart, is that I want them to remember it, that whenever you're struggling, whenever you're doubting, whenever you're on that roller coaster, to get off the roller coaster. It's like, wait a second, for I am convinced, okay? You don't even have to remember all of it, but just, I am convinced nothing can separate me from God's love. That's where I'm going to choose to place my identity in, instead of this roller coaster. And so remembering that, a great way to remember it is to just memorize this verse. And it's kind of fun to just repeat over and over. For I'm convinced neither death nor life, neither angels nor I mean, it's fun when you memorize it. We read it. I won't do it again. But yeah, I think just remembering and working on shifting your identity and reminding yourself where your identity truly is, are just big things that would help us.
Yeah. And I think the key thing in all of this is exactly what you were saying, Nate. Like, it's so easy for us to place our identity in a million things. And I know especially around Valentine's Day, like, one of those things that it's easiest to see in so many people is the way that we're tempted to place our identity or our value in whether we're in a relationship or not. And I think it's exactly what you were saying. It's finding like why behind why we're tempted to do that, and then remembering and anchoring our identity in who God says that we are, and in knowing that nothing can change the way that God loves us. And so I think then whether we're single or we're in a relationship or we're trying to start dating or whatever it is, that we know that we are already loved and that we can be secure in that identity. And again, this is really hard to remember sometimes. And I think one of the things that we want to talk about here a lot about at Sojourn is, imagine if we were the type of community that was constantly just reminding each other of this, that when we saw our friends trying to look to a relationship in order to find their identity or value, to remind them like, hey, you're already loved. Like, you don't need a relationship to prove that you're loved. And again, not that relationships are bad. I think relationships are great and we want you to have healthy relationships. But I think
we do. Healthy relationships, weddings. Like, I love going to weddings.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Please invite us. But again, like, we want you to know that you are deeply loved and valued, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not. And I think that starts with us as a community reminding each other of that. And so it's reminding our friends of that, or reminding even the people that we're trying to date, reminding each other like, hey, our identity is actually not coming from each other. It's coming from who God says that we are. And I think that if we were a type of community that was constantly doing that, it would change our lives. It would change the lives of our friends. It would change the lives of the people that we want to be in a relationship with. Ultimately, it would lead to healthier relationships and fewer regrets and a lot of better relationship decisions, which is really what we all want.
Yes, for sure. For sure. You said this, and when you said this, it just reminded me to when Amanda, my wife, and I were engaged, and we were talking about getting married and planning all that. And then when we got married, we talked a lot during that time about how like we couldn't place our identity in each other, or how like my mood, I was like, "Hey, just don't put that on me." Like I can't be the one that is the primary identifier, and that has served us well, and is definitely super, super valuable. So if you've listened to this and you're like, all right, what are some action steps, some things that I can actually do with this? One of them is you can read. You can read this on your own. That's where I like to start, is like actually read and spend some time. Maybe read all of Romans 8 on your own. You can check us out on the Bible app. We're there. We're labeled as a church on the Bible app, so you can check it out. And there we post, the readings that we've done, and you can read along with us. We talked about this, but taking some time, maybe as you read these verses, but reflect on how your identity is in God above everything else. Anchor yourself to that, and reminding yourself that you are deeply loved. And I honestly, I have my kids do this, and I would recommend it for anybody. But spending some time in prayer and saying, to remind yourself that where your identity truly, truly is. Because, as Sarah has said, if you do that, it will lead to better dates and fewer regrets. But if you're listening, like, okay, great, this didn't actually help me on dating. You know what? Next episode, we are going to be talking specifically about dating, about love, and how we're going to continue this conversation to how can you have better dates and fewer regrets, where we actually jump into talking about love and talking about dating. So we hope you join us for that. Hope you listen, like, comment, subscribe, share, all the things you're supposed to do. Check out the show notes for anything we reference. But in the meantime, until we see you again, Sarah, what do they need to do?
Stay awesome.
Stay awesome, friends. We will see you later. Peace.
Bye.